Thank you for listening to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast, available on iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, and Stitcher. Also, please follow Matt's Movie Reviews on Facebook, YouTube, Parler, and Instagram. And of course, be sure to visit www.mattsmoviereviews.net for the latest reviews, top 10 lists, and more. Now, on to the show.
I feel bad because I brought you to a place that I feel comfortable with on our first date.
First dates are always weird.
My pits just sweat when I'm nervous.
Feel my hands.
Oh, your hands are sweaty. Do you want to stay over or?
I have to let my dogs out.
Who let your dogs out?
Do you want me to bark?
No, you don't have to.
For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sid, Tom's brother. You could yell at him all you want, much like his wife Janet does.
He pushes my buttons.
I idolized him.
When you say it like that, it makes me feel bad for him.
You are the co-chair.
The Penn reunion, isn't that cool?
All of our coordinating will be done on Facebook. You need to get on social media pronto.
The whole world is online.
Tell me about it. I even got my law degree online.
Did I ever tell you that I was friends with someone famous in college? She's a pitch-perfect actress.
You were friends with Elizabeth Banks?
Yes!
And she knows who you are?
Yeah, I mean, I think she does. Dear Elizabeth, I just remembered something you used to do in college. You would wave and you would say, "Eat Wheaties!" Dear Elizabeth, random, but do you remember I was in that comedy improv troupe, Booty and the Hoe Fish? Do you remember we took intros? Eat Wheaties. Eat Wheaties. Eat Wheaties.
Who's Sid Straw?
He says he's a close acquaintance of Elizabeth Banks.
There is no such thing.
He's writing crazy posts on Elizabeth Banks' fan page.
They went viral. What does that mean?
It means a lot of people saw it.
Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I am your host, Matthew Perkovich, and this is episode number 342. Releasing April 30 in theaters across the US and on digital is Eat Wheaties, a comedy that stars Tony Hale as Sid Shaw, and eager to please every man whose life unravels when his obsession with proving that he is friends with actress Elizabeth Banks leads him to becoming a viral sensation. An underdog story that superbly blends cringe comedy and heartfelt drama, Eat Wheaties also delves into the nature of celebrity during the social media era where fame often does not bring good fortune. And joining me now on the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is the director and writer of Eat Wheaties, Scott ABRAMOVITCH. Scott, I thank you very much for your time today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Matt.
So it's really interesting. This movie is based on this book called The Lockley Letters, released in 2003, written by Michael Kuhn. That novel had to do with Sid Shaw, the character of Sid Shaw, his obsession with Heather Lockley, which for people of my generation, your generation, knew back then as kind of like the biggest kind of like star there was, especially on TV. What was it really about that novel that really spoke to you, that wanted you to adapt it, not only to the big screen, but to have it also as your directorial debut?
It's an interesting question. Because when I first read the book, I was just starting out as a writer, and hadn't started producing yet. And I was a friend of mine named Evan Schenkman, who I had gone to school with, who was working with Michael Kuhn, who the writer of the novel at a law firm actually, and he suggested I take a look at it and maybe it could make a movie. I read the book. I loved it. At the time that I read it the first time, I didn't quite see it as a film. I mean, it's an epistolary novel, which is all told through letters, and it's brilliant and funny. And the character of Sid Straw is clear and really sharply written. It's all told through his voice. But the challenge of turning that into a movie at that time, I didn't quite see that story being relevant enough to make a film around. Then I reread it again years later after he had written a sequel, and that brought me back to the Locklear letters. And the thing that stood out to me is that in the 10 years or so, or maybe it was more than that, it was probably maybe 12 years in between the time that I read it the first time and the second time, the world had changed, and particularly social media had made two things different in the way that I saw Sid's story and why I could make a film. The first was that this illusion of access to celebrities, that this feeling that on social media that they're right there, and that you can tweet out to them and put them on your friends list and post on their wall, and it feels like they're right there. And at the same time, this idea that somebody could do or say something that on social media that causes ripple effects in their life, that are innocuous from the things that they were trying to accomplish, whether you're trying to make a joke or saying something that came off as strange or creepy, or in the way that it does in the film. So both of those ideas, which were really built into Michael's book, but it's just in a different way, they suddenly felt really relevant. And that's where I reached out to Michael and asked him if the rights were available, because at that time I had already started producing as well, and knew that I could make this movie. Now, in terms of directing it, I wasn't quite sure that I was going to direct this, but the more I got into it, the more I really fell in love, not just with Sid's story, but what this idea of looking for connection means. I think there's lots of people in my life and parts of myself, I think, that are related to Sid's journey that I felt really personally connected to. And so I at some point I realized that I don't think I could pass this off to somebody else to tell the story, and that I needed to do it myself.
Adapting this book is like the challenge is twofold. You mentioned before you are adapting it to modern times. Whatever social media was in 2003, I don't even know if it's so hard for me to think back of the time before it, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
But it's also, like you said, the book is a series of letters, and here in your movie Eat Wheaties, you really do flesh out Sid's world. You have his family, and you have his job, and all these other stuff as well. Does it all begin with Sid in regards to adapting it into a film? Do you have to kind of create a world for him that is palpable for us to watch and to feel and to understand his interactions, not only with his family but with the outside world as well?
I think it does start with Sid, but I think the challenge and the fun part, actually, because I've adapted books before where I've loved so much of the book, and the challenge is really cutting things out. I think for this book, it was really exciting to actually build out some elements that weren't quite fleshed out in the book. So creating a fuller version of Sid's brother and his sister-in-law.
Yeah.
His parents. Which there's some jokes in there in the book about his relationship with his mom, but moving back into his parents' house was something that I know visually was gonna have some fun elements to it, and really just finding a way to make the arc of the character a little more transparent, because the book has a lot of the same story beats. The challenge was to really articulate, not from Sid's perspective, but from others' perspective, how they're perceiving him, and what really he needs to do to change the way, not only the way that they perceive him, but the way he perceives himself. And so that was actually a lot of fun. I mean, and casting both Tony Hale and David Walton was another actor who came on early enough that we were able to actually sit down and talk about the relationship between the brothers, because that was the key to me to making the audience understand what Sid's issue was, and why his struggles to connect were something that we should both care about and also potentially relate to. And I think the relationship with his brother was showing how when he's with him, he's on the inside of the jokes, and when he's not with him, he's on the outside, and people are not getting him and not connecting with him.
Yeah. The other thing you had to change there was the celebrity in question. Of course, likely letters had to do with Heather Luckily. Here, the celebrity is Elizabeth Banks. How did it come to choose Elizabeth Banks as the person who Sid would eventually obsess over? Did you have a list of celebrities you were looking at, and how did Elizabeth Banks be the one to be chosen at the end there?
So what I did was, when I was updating the film, I made a list of actresses who would be around Sid's age that really went to college and graduated from college ideally, because I felt like to create a fictional celebrity, it didn't make sense to use Heather Locklear for sure. And to create a fictional celebrity felt like it would potentially take you out of the movie. But by using Elizabeth Banks, it was an opportunity to not only say something about who the celebrity is, what she means. Elizabeth Banks was so perfect because I think the perception of her is that she's relatable and nice and is the kind of person you can imagine being friends with Sid, but also she has a huge social media presence. And I think that also was part of what drew me to have her at the top of my list. And she went to University of Pennsylvania, which is a great school. It could show, the fact that Sid went to that school, I think says something about his intelligence, and I think who he was back then to be able to get in and graduate from there. And reaching out to her, it was very anxious ridden, because I was hoping she would say yes, but really so invested in this, in this part of the story, that if she said no, I think it would have been a real letdown. But she said yes, and the University of Pennsylvania said yes, and they were so helpful. They sent us a whole bunch of really cool swag that we were able to put up in the film.
Awesome.
Pennants and T-shirts and mugs and all stuff that you see around Sid's room in his office, and even General Mills with the WHEATIES. Like, we were really so lucky that people saw what the story meant and what it was standing for, and just this idea that despite what the perception of him was from other people, that Sid's tendency to try too hard and say too much were not flaws in the way that other people were seeing it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you mentioned before in regards to Sid, he, in a lot of ways, he's the comedic foil, but he's also such an empathetic character as well. You really feel his loneliness throughout the movie. And Tony Howard does such a great job, really kind of bringing that balance between the awkward and the sincere. And it's really interesting because Tony Hale's, like, people know him from his stuff in the Arrested Development and Veep as well. And he's kind of like a character people kind of, and that those characters people laugh at him. And when you see it, is kind of like that at the start of the movie, but as the film kind of moves on, his arc kind of changes. That does change as well. And there were parts in the movie that Tony's performances made me laugh out loud. There's a particular part near the film's conclusion that really made me well up. When you watch a character like an actor like Tony take on a character like Sid and takes on your words and really brings his character to life, what's that experience like on the set watching Sid Shaw come to life in front of your eyes?
Oh, it was well, from a director's standpoint, it was the greatest gift that I could have had. It was, it made my job so much easier to navigate the challenges of making a low budget film on a short schedule, knowing that I had Tony, who was pretty much in every scene of the film, as not just the ultimate pro, but the ultimate collaborator. He was able to get who Sid was from the get-go, but also bring so much of what he connected with to the character into our conversations and into rewrites, so that by the time we got to the set, we had been working together for, I would say, maybe a year already, and just in talking and figuring out how to make that story work. So his comedic talents, I think, are incredible. Also, his ability to, from so much of his TV work, he's always next to somebody who's funny as well, and he's so great at taking the center of attention when it's necessary, but also his generosity as a performer to let the people around him shine in their moments was just a huge asset to both me and to the film.
The rest of the cast is terrific as well. You got Elisha Cuthbert, Alan Tudyk, Sarah Clark. You also have Paul Walter Hauser, and he's one of those actors that, to me, whatever he appears in, I want to watch it because I know he's going to be terrific in it. He's kind of like what William H. Macy was to the 90s and what John Hawkes was to the 2000s. He's that kind of character actor, that journeyman actor that's just terrific in every role. getting him on board this movie, how much of a joy was it working with him? And there's one particular scene I want to ask in regards to Paul Walter Hauser. There's a scene near the end of the film where he's threatening to staple his hand with a stapler. Was that something that was in the script, or something improvised? Because it seems like something that felt kind of improvised on the screen.
Oh yeah, that was the take that I was praying not to screw up. Paul was the secret weapon that we didn't know we'd have, because I was so lucky that I was able to get my first choice on pretty much every character on the screen.
Yeah.
And I never thought Paul would do this film. I mean, we didn't ask him at the start, because it felt out of reach for exactly the reasons you said. Seeing him, in the films that he had done, it was like, this sort of over the moon kind of reach that just didn't feel right. Because everyone we went to, I really felt that there was a good chance they would say yes. Anyways, we had an actor that we loved for the part, but we just couldn't make the schedule work because some of the locations that we needed were only on the weekends. And so we're a day into shooting, never mind before shooting, and we're realizing it's not going to work with that actor. And I reached out to the casting director. I said, look, and I talked to Tony as well, who was really helpful with bouncing ideas off of for casting. And I said, there's this actor, I don't know if you know who he is, but he's unbelievable. I'm not sure he'd do this, but let's take a shot. And to Paul's credit, now, for this little film from a budgetary standpoint, he read the script that day. He was in Michigan, and he flew himself back on his own dime to come to set, then to be there 2 days later to shoot. And that day is the day that we shot that stapler scene. I mean, his energy, the thing that you see on screen that's so special is present in him all the time. He's one of those people who everybody who meets him falls in love with him. And that day we had already done a couple of scenes where he just cracked everybody up, and we were shooting that scene with Rizwan and with Tony in the office. And he said, well, if we have time after you get what you need, can I have one more take? And at this point, I would have given him 20 takes. He was, knowing that something great was going to happen. But if we had the time, I said absolutely. And so we're shooting, and he takes the staple in the middle of the scene. It's a scene where he's defending Sid from his boss his old boss who fired him, and trying to get him, compensation. And he's he grabs the stapler and he said, like, in defense of him, saying, if you ever, hurt my client again, I'll do something. And then he grabs it, I'll staple my hand. And everyone was like, oh, is he going to actually staple his hand? And he's like, I'll do it. And sure enough, he stapled his hand, and we're all sitting there just trying not to break. And Tony's sitting there trying not to break. And Rizwan does not know what's going on. If you watch that, the piece that's in the film.
Exactly right. I could see him kind of looking to the left, and I imagine that's where you guys are off screen going like, what the hell is happening right now?
Oh, and then it's what's so disappointing with how we ended up using in the film is that what my actual favorite part of the way that it played out. So he staples his hand, and he's in pain, and he's shaking his hand, and they're trying not to break. And he said, and he holds his hand up, and he goes, this is a staple in a man's hand for a friend. To not break then was like impossible. Riz is about to lose it, and then the brilliant Tony Hale takes the stapler and moves it away from Paul Walter Hauser. It's like the perfect button to the scene. So I hope I'm able to put that out. We didn't have the ability to put that onto the deleted scenes, and I should have. I wonder if it's too late for the DVD. I'm going to try to get it out there because it's really just so special.
Well, if you can, that'll be awesome, because I'd love to see that.
Yeah.
The film is really interesting as well in that, it touches on something that's really happening quite a bit. especially in regards to relations to the internet and social media and that sort of the whole thing of cancel culture. As they say, the internet is forever, and no matter when people post things or how they do it, it could be something really innocent or whatever. They could delete it. Like people can dig up this stuff and like really can ruin a person's life. And I think Sid in this movie, he is in many ways his own worst enemy, but he's also, it seems to me, he's also become almost a victim as well of a society that really thrives on humiliation. Do you think like when writing this movie, especially when adapting it to the social media kind of morals of today, did that whole kind of cancel culture aspect really something that really kind of stuck with you in regards to what's happening with Sid in his story?
It did, and it's funny how from the time that I started writing it to the time that we're releasing the movie, how things have gotten much more drastic in terms of the way and how and the ways that people are attacking others online for the things that they've said and done. And a lot of this is stuff that's you know things, real negative things that people are pointing out in people's pasts, and things that that are potentially deserving of shining a light on. Other times they're a little more in that gray area where sometimes people say things that they thought were funny, or maybe they were things that were funny in that moment in time. The idea of what is appropriate for making jokes is this whole hot button subject that I certainly didn't want to make that a part of the film, because I didn't think that was necessary for Sid's story. But I do think that this idea of picking on people, low hanging fruit, is something that we as a society have always had, and this is just a different way of doing it. The kids who get picked on in school are just now have another way of being picked on, and obviously there's great uses for for social media and defending people who potentially can't get can't speak for themselves, or have been taken advantage of. But that's not what this story was about. Somebody who had good intentions, who was trying to connect with people. And this idea of stalking, which is I actually I don't particularly like that word when it's used in connection with Sid's story, because I don't think there's anything stalkish about what he's doing. I mean, he's reaching out to somebody who he felt was a friend, and in a time when he doesn't really have anybody else to talk to in his life, this becomes his his sort of sounding board and his lifeboat. And he, there was a post that we shot that that we took out of the film, which maybe in hindsight it was something that I loved, but the pacing of the movie was becoming the primary factor. And he tells Elizabeth Banks that he knows that she's not reading, he knows she's probably not reading these posts, and he's just doing this kind of out of habit. And that I think I hope people still do get that. I think that there's an element of this being a sort of confessional for him to get out his feelings to someone, even if it's just a Facebook page. So I all this to say that I hope that people look at his misadventures on social media and think twice about posting something nasty about somebody, or something, a video, or a movie or a book or whatever it is. There's ways to articulate what you think without being nasty, and I think we need as a society, we need to get better at that.
I think so too. And for me, Sid's story is one almost kind of like of acceptance. There's a part in the movie where he talks about his time with Elizabeth Banks in college, and at the lowest part of his life, she accepted him for who he was, and that's where the kind of like "Eat Wheaties" slogan kind of came from. It's kind of like a positive, kind of like keep your chin up kind of thing as well. And it's definitely something that stuck with him. And he himself at that time is going through a low part of his life. And I think that's what a lot of people need to understand too. Sometimes on the internet, you don't know who is behind the keyboard. They could be going through something really bad in their life. They could be suffering some type of mental kind of like break at that moment. Anything could be going on. And I think people just need to cut other people slack. And I think what's really important about this movie, Eat Wheaties, is that it's a story that's entertaining, but it's also really, it's thought-provoking. It makes you kind of think twice about, what it is to be a person on social media as well. And I just can't recommend it enough for people to check it out. So April 30, releasing in US theaters and also on digital. And I'm sure that from then on it will be out in other regions as well. And I really recommend people check out Eat Wheaties. And Scott, I thank you very much for your time today. I know you've been so very busy promoting this film, and so it's terrific to talk to you. And again, I just want to say thank you for joining me, and congrats with the movie.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.